YouTube, what is good? Welcome back to the channel. We are talking about my newest camera today, and that is this camera right here, the Yashica Mat 124G. Been wanting this camera for a very long time, but honestly, they were a bit pricey on eBay, so I didn't pull the trigger for a very long time. But I got real lucky. One of my homies here in London was getting rid of his because he was looking to acquire some cash to make a different purchase, and I jumped right on it. And this was a fantastic decision because this thing right here, it's basically mint. And I know these words don't really mean much in the internet age, but this thing was cleaner and worked better and was just more overall pristine than any used camera I've ever bought before. I've had some bad luck in the past with the random cameras where they might need a little bit more TLC and maybe even some repairs. This didn't need anything. This was perfectly clean. And honestly, now it's a little bit less clean since I started using it, because I'm definitely not the kind that really babies cameras and keeps them perfectly and in the greatest condition possible. I get out there, I use them, and they got to put up with me. But anyways, this camera is fantastic for many, many reasons. I think the first thing I want to talk about right off the bat is the size. This camera is kind of the standard TLR size. And I mention that because I've been using the Mamiya C330 for a while now, maybe for about a year, and I use it extensively, and that camera is much bigger than this one when it comes to being a TLR. I don't find that to be a bad thing for the Mamiya. In fact, I love this size because I use it for portraiture work, things that are a bit more kind of controlled, maybe some studio work, and that heft is good for that. But in terms of traveling with that camera, it's not ideal. And one of my previous videos when I talked about it, I said I had that Mike Tyson neck. It's not quite Mike Tyson size, but I can walk around with it for a while. It doesn't really bother me, but the problem is when I'm packing. The camera, the other one, the C330, is just much bigger than this in terms of volume. This is so small, and it's kind of this perfect little rectangular cube kind of shape that it kind of fits into any bag very nicely, especially if you're wearing a book bag or if you have a very small bag. This can kind of slot in there and not really protrude too much, and because it's kind of boxy, it's very easy to compartmentalize. So size-wise, this camera is perfect. All right, before we talk more specs about this camera, let's go look at some footage from my recent trip to Greece. I went to Rhodes, Greece, which is one of the bigger islands in the kind of the Greek channel, and it was amazing. I just kind of chilled, drank some beers, ate a whole lot of seafood, and I did a lot of photography, of course. So let's go ahead and check out some of the footage from that and check out some of the pictures. This camera is fantastically made in terms of how durable it feels. You can tell this thing isn't 100% metal, and that's okay. I think the key things, kind of the structure of this, and of course, you know, this cover in the back, these things are definitely metal, but you can tell that there's some, you know, accent pieces in here that are maybe plastic or some sort of like composite material. And then this like leathery surface here, this isn't real leather, or at least I don't think it is. You know, this camera was made to be a bit cheaper than a Rolleiflex, which is kind of the Cadillac of the TLR world. This clearly was maybe a bit more consumer friendly, and therefore they cut some corners. But cutting corners here, you don't really feel it. You don't think that, you know, when you hold this camera in your hand, you don't think that it's not a well-made camera. It feels very durable and solid. And honestly, that lack of some metal in some of these components helps bring the weight down. So I think that's a positive, but it feels very sturdy. Nothing in here is jiggly, and you know, nothing in here feels like it's not well put together. This is a great camera, and apparently very popular in its heyday. I didn't do too much research on the history of this camera. I'm sure some people can tell me in the comments all about this, but long story short is this was not, you know, the expensive camera that the Rolleiflex cameras are. This was definitely a bit more friendly for the average photographer. So obviously one of the most important things when we talk about TLR cameras is the lens. This has a 3.5 Yashica lens. It's an 80 millimeter. So in terms of, you know, what the images look like at 3.5 aperture, you get pretty nice bokeh when you talk about portraits. If you shoot wide open, especially if you get closer to your subject, you're gonna get that classic medium format kind of blur that's behind your subject. 3.5 is pretty substantial for medium format. I know everybody wants the 2.8, but cameras TLR that have 2.8 are gonna be much more expensive. I've got the Rolleiflex, the really old one with a 2.8 lens. That thing costs at least $1,000, pounds, whatever currency you want. It's very pricey and, you know, maybe unattainable for some people's budgets. This was a lot cheaper. I got a really good deal of this because, again, I got it from my homie, but if you go online, you can see how much they cost on eBay and that kind of thing. But the 3.5 lens is great. I've got zero complaints about it, and I don't find myself missing that, you know, half a stop. I think it's half a stop from 3.5 to 2.8. I'm not sure, but I don't find myself missing that. You know, if anything, I kind of gain something in that focusing at 3.5 gives me just a bit more depth of field while still getting that beautiful bokeh, and therefore I get more shots in focus. At 2.8 with other cameras, it can get pretty tough. So this lens is great, and it's very sharp. You know, a lot of these cameras, they're kind of standard when it comes to the lenses. You're not getting anything, you know, incredible or anything that's that different from the standard. The lenses perform well, especially when you stop down, and they're more vintage lenses, so you get some of those characteristics, maybe some halation here and there, maybe a slight color shift, things like that that are gonna add some charm to your images as opposed to giving you a super modern look like lenses of nowadays that are super clean, super crisp, super sharp, all of the above. This is a classic lens from the 80s, so it's gonna kind of fit that profile. The taking lens here is a 2.8, which is good because that gives you a lot more light coming in, and it helps when you're looking through the viewfinder up top. Speaking of the viewfinder, this kind of works just like any other TLR. You know, you flip over or you flip open this, and there instantly you see the image through the top lens here. You do have a little magnifying glass when you press in there, and that helps a lot, obviously, when you're trying to get things in focus. I use that a lot, basically use it at all times, unless I'm shooting something at infinity, in which I just zone focus infinity and then just look through the general viewfinder, and it doesn't really make that big a difference, especially if I'm stopped down. But when you're doing portraits at 3.5, you have to pull that magnifying glass to really help you get that critical focus. But yeah, my camera has just a normal prism in here. There's no markings or anything. You can kind of just see exactly what you get. Some of the other cameras, like for example, my Mamiya C330, that has the split prism. So that can be very helpful when you're doing portraiture, but sometimes it might be a little distracting as well. I don't know, I find that with that camera, I sometimes miss focus, even though I really think I nailed it. With this one, I've had a much easier time, and I think it's probably because I'm shooting at 3.5 as opposed to 2.8. And that little hint of additional depth of field makes a difference and helps me nail my focus on my images. So the lens here is great, pretty standard stuff. And then shutter speed wise, my camera goes all the way up to 1/500th of a second. So, you know, classic TLR where you have these little knobs on the side. One of my only complaints about this camera is that the knob to change the shutter speed is a little tight, especially if your hands start to get a little damp or sweaty and it's hot outside. It's easy to slip there. The grip isn't the best, especially because you really need to sink in there to turn. But either way, it works and it's fine. But 1/500th of a second is the max shutter speed, and then the aperture dial here moves super easily, and I think that's fine. I think that's probably normal given that it doesn't click. You know, it doesn't stop at any aperture. You can kind of go as far as you want in between. Whereas with the shutter speeds, It's a bit more defined, although it doesn't click either. But yeah, pretty standard stuff here with the lens. I don't know if they made different versions of this lens for the 124Gs, but of course there's the 124 model that's not G, which I think the light meter is the only difference. And then there's other Yashica cameras that are TLR as well. Talking about the light meter here, this camera's light meter works. You know, it moves around when you change your settings. You see the little arrow and the indicator move. You can change your ISO or ASA, as they say, on the side here, but I don't use light meter. I don't trust it. I've never really trusted light meters that aren't electronic. I just, you know, I'd rather have a light meter on hand. And I always have my Sekonic light meter that I just kind of do my incidence reading pointed at the subject, or reflective reading. That's the one where you point it at the subject. And yeah, I use that and it works great. It hasn't let me down at all. With a camera like this, especially with that 3.5 lens, you can use this to do whatever you want. You can do portraits if you want. You can do kind of the typical landscape stuff, anything in between. This camera is very versatile, and I think that 80mm focal length plus the 3.5 aperture kind of just puts you in this middle ground where you can, you know, go in any direction you want. This camera doesn't kind of scream one thing versus another. It's not a professional camera. I wouldn't say use this over other ones if you're doing like a studio shoot. But if you're taking photos of your friends, or if you meet somebody interesting in the streets when you're on holiday or just walking around, you know, definitely put that at 3.5 and bust off a really nice portrait. They're gonna look beautiful. But of course, if you're hiking or if you're just kind of wandering and seeing things, this works just like any other camera shooting at infinity or something far away. You can stop down, get really nice sharp images, and yeah, it's just convenient to have that mix. You know, you can do all of the above without having to add new lenses or change anything. It's kind of a one-stop shop. It isn't perfect for anything, but it is relatively capable at all of the things. So all in all, very happy about this camera. Don't regret my purchase at all. And I'll still keep using the C330 when I'm doing my studio shoots, because I think that camera is more capable for that. It gives you a bit more control, and the size is very useful there. But when I'm out there, you know, walking around holiday, or when I move to New York City and I'm just kind of cruising around the streets, this is gonna be on me basically at all times. And I'm pretty excited about that. All right, so we're gonna do something new here. I want you all to start commenting on these videos more, because I'm gonna be responding in the video, in the future videos, to the best comments from the previous video. So make sure to comment and leave me something, whether it's a question about anything or the video, whatever you want, just comment. I'm gonna read through some that I had on the previous video here, which was the Ilford factory tour. So let's jump in. This one's from Bert. He writes, kudos to Ilford. To keep these people for decades and decades means they're doing something right and treating them well. They still look like they enjoy what they do, and they love what they do. Very cool vid. I mean, yeah, that's basically the secret sauce to Ilford. You got people who've been working there for a very long time, and they like it. And honestly, I felt that when I was there, so it definitely is something that's very important to them. And I agree with you. Kudos to Ilford. Seeing how happy people were there to work, that kind of makes me excited about spending money on Ilford products. So I'm going to continue to do so, and you probably should too. All right, the next comment we have here is from Brendan O'Neill. Brendan says, this is so damn cool. Emulsion looks like Parmigiano Reggiano, and that explains why HP5 looks so damn tasty. Def loving these behind the scenes videos. Looks into labs and film production, man. I don't think it looks like Parmigiano Reggiano, although, you know, I'm not gonna hate on your description. I actually think it looks like tofu, which to me is kind of a love-hate thing. We haven't had tofu on Feasting on Film, but I do like tofu depending on how it's prepared. So maybe you'll see that in a future video. All right, the next one's from Cameron Wilson. Cameron writes, I recently watched a tour video of Kodak plant, which was looking old, tired, and neglected. I was blown away at how modern and well-maintained the Ilford plant is. Well done, Ilford. I haven't been to the Kodak plant, but I definitely want to go. So, you know, maybe drop a comment to Kodak on their social medias and say you want to see Ribsy at the plant. Moving back to New York, so it's not that horrible of a drive from New York City. It's about only 5 hours, let's say, to Rochester. The point is, I'm going to make an effort to go. Next comment from Dorian G. Ilford are great. I had an issue with a roll, sent them samples, etc. They sent me a box of film with a handwritten apology. I was blown away. I mean, that's Ilford. I've heard stories like this from other people as well. Ilford tends to look out for the customers, and if you've got a problem, they want to fix it. All right, next comment here is from Wendy Chapman. Excellent video, Ribsy. Thank you. Are the coffins temperature controlled? I can't imagine they let film bake in the sun. So I'm assuming the coffins are temperature controlled or insulated in some way, but to clarify, the ones you saw in the video that were outside, those were all empty. I think those were ones that had already been used, whatever was inside, and therefore they're just storing them outside because, you know, why keep them inside if you don't really need to? All right, next one here is from Arkin. Arkin writes, did you ask them about how they train new staff who are dedicated and as they are to continue operations into the future? So we actually did have a quick little chat about this. I don't have all the details, but I know that they've hired some really, really dedicated younger people who really want to be part of this going into the future. And these people are basically apprentices. So they're training slowly, they're working side by side with the people that they theoretically may replace one day. And trust me, Ilford is aware that this is very important because the future of film is in the knowledge of how to work all these old school machines. So they're making sure to invest in that. And who knows, that's probably gonna scale in the future. Go on Ilford's website, maybe they got some jobs listed. Or just hit them up on the DMs. Maybe you can get something like that if you're interested. All right, the next one is from Lovely Traveler. Nice vid, I really enjoyed it. One thing I asked myself, why do they produce only black and white film stocks? Do you know that maybe? I actually have no idea, but I think historically tons of people have been rumbling about, whether Ilford should jump into color or not. All I know is this, if they do jump into color, they're gonna make a lot of money on that because people really wanna see it. But just seeing how hard black and white film is, so many steps and so many machines, color theoretically is that much more difficult because of the different steps that are required for the color part specifically. So they could probably use similar machines, but the whole process would have to be kind of tailored to the color process. I don't know anything about that, but I know we all want color film from anybody, but of course we'll take it from Ilford. Next comment is from Phil Makes Things. Casually unrolling a spool of 120 to show us all the components. I know, that hurt a little bit. I saw that in person when she unrolled the 120 spool, and I was like, ooh, it kind of stung me a little bit too, but it is what it is. Demonstration is very important, and we all learn from this. So, there's one casualty for the millions and millions of rolls that they produce. All right, last comment here is from Will. Will says, I love sausage. I think that's in reference to the beginning of the video when we talk about I finally got to see how the secret sausage is made, or how the sausage is made. I forgot how I phrased it. Long story short, we all love sausage. All right, y'all, to the next video. I'm out.